Good morning, everyone. Are we excited to get started today? We're gonna do some really easy stitching this week just to get comfortable, especially if this is your first time doing quilting in the hoop, if it is your first time doing embroidered quilts, things along that line. So this week's gonna be not too difficult. Well, not that any week is really gonna be that difficult, but we're going to start off nice and easy, lots of repetition to get ourselves started. I'm hoping that I can hold off any sort of coughing fits that may decide that it want to kick in here. So this week we are going to be working on these blocks. So these blocks are just background, quilting, and then it is just embroidery. There is no applique or anything along that lines there for us this week. So like I said, very, very easy. We have 4 snowflakes to stitch. We have basically the block that reads "This home believes," a block that reads "'Tis the season to snuggle," and then we have the 5 letters to stitch. I'm specifically going to demonstrate the letter E today because he is the only one out of all of these blocks that have one little extra step or a difference than the rest of the blocks. So we will kind of go over all of those. So I want to take a moment and kind of look at the book. We're going to look at how the book is structured and how to read the book, because sometimes that can be challenging in itself. So I'm specifically going to look at the letter E, like I said. So I'm going to pull out my baggie that I had all my letters in. I'm going to pull out the pieces that are going to be associated with the letter E. Okay, and then in my book, I'm going to turn to, the letter E is going to be found on page 20. Okay, excuse me. Okay, so looking at that on page 20, the first thing we're going to look at is making sure that the instructions are going to match what we're going to do. We're going to do the E block. Tells us that we need to have a background fabric. That should be 6.5 by 6.5. It is the gray stripe if you are doing it out of the actual fabric. So let me put this down here. Let's go over here. Get out of the way. So I have my gray stripe fabric. We have a hook and loop dot. Okay, so a sew-on hook and loop dot is a piece of Velcro. Okay, it is a Velcro dot. In your embellishment kit, you have a package of Velcro dots. We want the larger of the 2 sizes. We need 1 of the 3/4 inch circles, and we only need the smooth side of it. We do not need the rough side of that particular Velcro. Okay, so you can see here is that little tiny Velcro dot. Okay, it's the larger of the 2 sizes that are in that kit bag for you, and we only need the smooth one. We need some fabric glue, just a glue stick, nothing fancy. It's mainly just to hold that glue, that Velcro dot in place while we stitch it. We're going to need a piece of light mesh cutaway stabilizer. So if you work in the world of poly mesh, it's going to be OESD's poly mesh. or you work in the world of OESD stabilizer. We're using poly mesh. If you have Kimberbell, it is called light mesh cutaway. It is orange in color, the packaging label, and you're going to need a piece of fusible backing. We talked about that last week, and that fusible backing needs to be fused to the wrong side of your background square. Okay. Tells us there to iron the fusible backing to the wrong side of the background. So I've already done that for us here. Okay. So let's zoom out a little bit. So we have our hoop, has a piece of poly mesh stabilizer in it. I have my background fabric. I have my piece of batting that I'm going to need because I'm going to be doing quilting in the hoop. If you are doing the block by block quilting, you're going to need a piece of batting. Like I said, that batting is approximately 1 inch bigger than the finished block. So I cut my batting at a 5 by 5 square for us. And then again, you're going to need your Velcro dot, which we'll need later down the road here, and we're going to set up our design. Okay. Now, with creating the design or setting up the design, I'm first going to talk about doing this with quilting in the hoop. Okay? I'm going to talk about how to set it all up, and then I will talk about if you're not going to be quilting in the hoop. So in the instructions there on page 20, she's telling you that this design is going to need this design, the letter E is going to need this quilt design, okay? It is the quilt design that is labeled in the Winter 2 folder, and it's the 4x4 design. And it tells us that the alignment of the quilt design with the embroidery file is going to be centered. Now this is important because not all the time is the quilting and the embroidery design centered on each other. For everything that you're doing this week, it is, okay? There's nothing special about layering the two of these. So we're going to come over to the machine here. I am working on a Bernina 790, but if you have a Bernina 5 series, 7 series, any of the 8s, older or newer, the way that our designs come in and center is the same. And we just need to be able to group designs. If you do not have the ability to combine designs directly on your embroidery machine, it's not a problem. We're going to open up the quilt file, you'll do the quilting, and before we move anything on the hoop, we'll open up the new file with the letter E in it, and then you'll stitch that. Okay. So the first thing that I want to open is going to be the quilt design. So I probably have everything on a USB stick. So I'm going to come up to the top here and I'm going to choose USB. Now I have gone through and put everything in a folder on my USB labeled Cup of Cheer. And I was super organized. And I labeled everything by the date in which I plan to demonstrate it for you. So I'm going to choose the 13th. And so I've put everything in the 13th that's related to this week's files so that I'm not overwhelmed as to looking at everything and accidentally pulling up the wrong file. So the first thing that we need is to get the quilt design. The quilt design is the first thing that needs to stitch. Therefore, it's the first thing that you need to open on the machine. And I had told you that in the book, it tells us that we need the 099-winter, okay, -2, the 4x4 design. So on the newer Berninas and maybe on your machine, they may be labeled for you. You can see that I have the 098s. If I arrow over, I will find 099-4x4. Okay, the winter is going to be at it's farther out. We can only see so many characters, but I can tell that the design is going to be the snowman, and that's the file that we want. So we're going to open up that design, and it's immediately going to put it in the middle of the hoop. Okay, so with Bernina's, and maybe for other brands, I don't know other brands as well as I know Bernina's. Anytime you open a design, it's always going to center it inside the smallest hoop possible that this is going to fit in. Okay, everything this week is going to work inside of the Bernina oval hoop. If you want to use a different hoop, you can, but it's got to be larger than the oval. You're just going to be using more stabilizer than what you need. But you are more than welcome to. I know that many people love their midi hoop because of how easy it is to ratchet it open and closed over the thumb screws of the oval hoop. So now that I have the quilting design open, and I know that I have the right quilting designs, because if you remember, we talked about last week, there may be a folder in your quilt designs that labels things as clear blue tiles and block by block. We always want to choose the block by block folder, okay? That's because we're quilting this block by block. And because of that, you see that we have those two sets of squares. Okay, those are going to be our tack downs and our placement lines for batting in our fabric. In a clear blue tile block, you won't see those squares. So therefore, you're not going to be able to know where to put your fabric at. Okay? So that's kind of a visual cue for you to tell the difference between a clear blue tile version of the design and a block by block version. Okay? So we have the block by block version, little snowman quilting pulled up. And now I want to add my letter E file to this. Okay, so I'm going to come over here on the right, and I'm going to hit the plus sign here within my layers. For some of you, you may have to hit your folder and then hit this plus sign. They both do the same thing. Just one is sometimes one is on one screen and not the other. I'm going to navigate back to my USB stick, and I'm going to locate my file that has my letter E in it. And I'm going to add that. Again, open a file. The machine centers it in the hoop. So because I did not move the quilting design, when I add my letter E, it is exactly centered over top of my quilting file. Okay, and everything is now ready for us to stitch. Okay, so if you want to take a moment to go over getting that created on your machine, I want to talk about if you are not going to be quilting in the hoop, how to get your fabric into the hoop. Okay, so in the instructions, you will find this set of instructions that says hooping instructions. This is only hooping instructions if you are not quilting in the hoop. All right, so that set of instructions, let's come out here to the camera. I'm going to back out a little bit. There's a couple of ways that we can do this. One, we're going to put our stabilizer in the hoop. We want our stabilizer to be bigger than our hoop. You want at least a good half to an inch larger all the way around. There should be stabilizer in all areas of the hoop, no matter what brand or whether you're quilting or not quilting. That is the rule for all of the stabilizer. Should fill the hoop. You can, if you have a hoop template for your embroidery hoop, which I'm getting out now, okay, it's plastic template, I can drop that in the hoop and I can take and mark center, okay? And I'm going to line it up with a grid on my cutting mat. So I have these dots. They're, let me see if I can zoom in a little bit more. Oops, wrong direction. You can kind of see them, those 3 little dots. I'm going to line them up with a line on my mat here. I'm going to take my background fabric. I'm going to fold him in half and then in half again. I'm going to kind of somewhat crease it with my fingers. You could draw these lines if you wanted. And I'm going to line up my creases with the dot on the hoop center and a line on the grid. Okay? And that's going to get me centered in this hoop. You can take Kimberbell tape and tape this down so that it doesn't move. Now, if you're not quilting in the hoop, I'm going to highly suggest that you float a piece of stabilizer underneath of this to help keep from additional shrinking happening when we go to lay in the denser stitched letters or snowflakes or anything along that line. So once you have this in the hoop and you put your hoop on the machine, if you slide a piece of like lightweight tearaway, ultra clean and tear, anything like that underneath the hoop, that'll help. You can even 505 spray it back here to help kind of hold that in place, just to give your fabric a little bit more body. Because if you are quilting in the hoop, we have batting here. We don't need that layer of stabilizer, okay, if you're quilting in the hoop. All right, so I'm gonna pull that out because I am gonna quilt in the hoop. We're gonna come over to the machine. Now, in my bobbin, I have neutral color thread, okay? Nobody's gonna see it. It's in the bottom of my machine. It's on the back of my quilt. Nobody's gonna see it. I have created my design, is up on my machine. I have a new 7511 or 8012 sharp embroidery needle in the machine. My top thread, I have threaded in white. And the reason I'm doing white is because that's the color that I want to quilt on this particular background fabric. So whatever color I'm going to quilt with is the color that I'm going to start with in my machine. And we're going to run all of the initial color stops with that one color. Okay. So step 1 of the design is going to be to stitch a placement line so that we know where to put our piece of batting. Going to run an outline here for us. And if as I'm going along, if you have any questions, please feel free to drop it in the chat. I'll gladly answer anything for you. Okay, so it's laid me a nice placement line. I'm going to take my piece of batting. I'm going to completely cover that placement line, and I'm going to run the color stop. There's no need to worry about, am I the same amount above, below, left, and right? We're going to be trimming all of this excess off, okay? So it's not super necessary that the batting be exactly cut, super accurate, okay? Because all of this is going to be cut off. If you have scraps of embroidery batting or anything like that, use your batting tape to to join them together. Use some zigzag if you would like, because you're going to quilt over it. It's, you know, use all that you can use. Okay. We're going to take this off the machine and we're going to put it right here. And I am going to trim all this batting away, all the way around this hoop. Scissors of your choice, and these scissors need to be sharpened. Okay. Okay. Get you in here. Batting is trimmed all the way up to that stitching line. And then we're going to return the hoop to the machine. Now, this is where I differ a little. The next color stop of this design is going to tell you where to put your fabric. I think I know where this fabric needs to go, right? And it is plenty big enough for this. So I'm actually going to skip color stop 3 on the machine. Okay, so I am, let me show you. So here on the machine, this was color stop 2 is what we use to tack our batting down. Color stop 3 is telling us where we're going to put this piece of fabric. Again, my fabric is oversized. I know exactly where it needs to cover. So I'm going to come down to my color bar and I'm going to advance to color stop 4. Okay. Color stop 4 is going to tack our fabric down. Okay. Now with the letter E, in the graphic image, the lines on your E go top to bottom. Okay. It's your project. If you want the lines to go left to right, that's just fine. But I'm going to take my lines top to bottom. I'm going to, one second, I'm going to iron those finger creases that I made in here a minute ago. I want to get those creases out. Okay. Now, here we go. So I'm going to slow my machine down quite a bit. Not so much for coming across, but when I come down the side, I want to make sure that I'm straight. I don't want this to be, you know, kind of crooked. And I know that I cut a straight edge in my fabric and the edge of my hoop is straight here. And so I know it's pretty straight where it's at, but I'll show you here in a second how I make adjustments. I'm going to keep my hand on my fabric. I'm going to keep it taut. So as the machine comes down, I'm watching where it's stitching, and I'm just making sure that it's staying in the same place all the way down. And then I can speed it up across the bottom. And if I have to make adjustments, I can here on the side. Okay, so my stitching line is traveling right to the outside of that gray line there, and here it's doing, if let me block that light, the same thing here. And so I just kind of moved the fabric and made adjustments as I went with that. So now that your background fabric is tacked in place, I'm going to run the quilt design. Okay. And we're going to quilt. So how many people got themselves all prepped last week? Took me a few hours over the weekend. But all my fabric is cut with the exception of borders and binding. And I misspoke last week about binding being in your kit. There is no binding in this kit, so you can use the suggestion in the book or choose your own. And like I said, we still have all of majority of the fabrics available. Now you'll notice in the embroidery design in the book as well, they're showing you a graphic and then she's walking you through what each of the color stops is going to do. So after we've done the quilt design, the first thing that's going to happen is going to be to stitch the letter fill. Okay, color of your choice. It's red in the actual quilt, so I'm using Isacord 1902. Isacord 1900 works as well. And we're going to run that color stop. Now, I want to talk about something while the machine is stitching. For those of you that have been embroidering for a while, you may be very familiar with a thread net. For those of you that are more, well, if you're a regular here at Material Girls, you know about a Wonder Guard, okay? And the importance of these two particular items, okay? I've recently shifted to using Wonder Guards. They have a longer life to them than thread nets. Once they stretch out, they're not as effective. So if you work on a machine where your spool pin lays out flat, okay, it lays horizontal on the machine. I'm gonna see if this will, yeah, you can kind of see better here. And the thread travels across to the first little take up or tensioner on the machine, the first little hook. The thread should go straight across. It shouldn't lay in a U. It shouldn't drape down to the bottom, the back of your machine. It should be straight across. And so what happens is a lot of times as the machine is stitching, thread just pulls off and then it starts to kind of drape down on the back of the machine, and then it can cause some issues at the first tensioner at the back of the machine. It also can jump out of that first disc that's there, loops, all sorts of things, thread breakage, knots, so on and so forth. This is also how it sometimes will get caught behind your spool cap if you use a spool cap. So we highly recommend that you use thread nets or a Wonder Guard. I'm going to show them both to you. So you're going to take your thread off the spool like it was going to be on the machine. If you're using a thread net, you're going to take your thread net in the bottom of your spool, and then you're going to flip it up and over the bottom. This way you're not stretching it out by digging in here trying to get your spool, your thread tail out. And you can see that that helps to keep this nice and taut as it's being pulled into the machine. A Wonder Guard works the same way. It's like a large piece of cling wrap. Wonder Guard is sold in a small and a regular size, or a small and a large. You want the, I believe they're regular, I'll confirm here in a second. The regular size Wonder Guard for the Isacord, they're longer. So I'm going to again pull my spool thread out, and I'm just going to wrap the Wonder Guard around my spool and allow it to stick to itself. You don't want it too tight, because if you put it on really tight, your thread may not pull off of here nice and easily, but you don't want it to be so loose that this just pulls off with the thread as well. And so that's going to help keep that also nice and tight on the back of your machine. And if you use a spool pin that allows your thread to stand up, this Wonder Guards and thread nets work for those as well, because it just adds a little bit more security or tightness to your thread. And if you're not familiar with Isacord or most other embroidery brands, I believe most of them have they unlatch from the bottom for you to wrap your tail around and then lock it in, so that when you are tidying up for the day, you can keep all your threads nice and neat and not a bunch of extra tails. Okay, so that's a Wonder Guard and a thread net. Okay, let me look at Wonder Guards here for a second. Yes, small and regular. So regular is the size that you want for your Isacords or your larger embroidery spools. Small is for like small spools of Thank you, Miss Betty. Can you hear me now? I need this mic pack to like make a noise or vibrate when the battery dies on it. It's not in an area that I can hear. It's not an area I can see all the time. So it's like I need to be shocked when the vibrate. So what with hopefully I don't know what you didn't hear. Stitching the next color stop, which is going to be, I'm going to stitch it in blue. The blue thread color I'm using is Isocord 3732. That is the closest to the coordinating glide thread color. 3600 and 4133 are also pretty close in matching. Thank you. I've fixed my microphone. So did you hear about, let me just back up in case you didn't, did you hear about Wonder Guards and thread nets, or do I need to repeat myself on that topic? I knew I should have looked at that microphone this morning. So if you let me know if you didn't hear any of that, and I will talk again. Okay, once that color is done, or the number is done, everything that you've done so far is pretty much everything that you're going to be doing with all the other color designs, all the other letter designs or snowflake designs today. The letter E is the only one that has the number on it. The next thing that the design states is that you're going to stitch the hook and loop placement line. So I'm going to go over to white thread. And it's going to stitch me a circle. Oh, thank you, Miss Betty and Miss Sharon. I'm glad you heard that. I'm glad it died after my wonder card. So I'm going to stitch a circle. Okay. Now, these, one second, let me get, the next thing that we're going to do is place the Velcro dot in place. So I just want to make sure that now she calls for fabric glue, but these Velcro dots are sticky on the back, so we're going to give this a try. So on here, there's a circle that's stitched, and this is going to go over top of that circle. And then the next color stop is going to stitch through that Velcro to hold it in place. Now, if you're using a 7511, we're going to see if it's going to fit, if it's going to work. Not sure how sticky this sticky is. Okay, I didn't have any problems, so you may be okay as well. But you won't really need the glue because the glue dots are sticky on the back. But if you were doing this project and you bought your own glue dot, your own Velcro dots, and couldn't find any that were pre-sticky, you can just use a little swipe of Elmer's glue on the back of it, and that will stitch it down. Okay, so it stitches a little star inside of that to hold that glue, that dot down. Oh, thank you, Miss Sharon. Now, the final step of this design is, again, the letter E is the only one that has this step in it because we have some special trimming instructions. So I'm going to change over to a light gray color so that I can see it, but I don't want it to be too bold, so I'm just going to grab one of my colors. And we have some trimming lines that the machine is going to stitch. Okay, so they're going to stitch one here in the lower corner and one in the upper corner, just kind of two L-shaped pieces. And with that, the design is finished. So we've got this little trimming mark and this little trim mark. And we're going to take this over to the cutting table and we are going to trim. Okay. So that you can see, there is your letter E that's done. Now, like I said, the E I demonstrated because it's the only one that has these 2 extra steps, well 3. It has a number, has a Velcro dot, and has a trimming line. Your M, the 2 R's, and the Y's don't have that. It is just quilt and letter. That's it. Okay? But because of the number and the Velcro dot, we want to make sure that when we trim this to size that we get it in the right place so that it is positioned correctly. Okay? So when you are working on this, you will find that in some places, and I will specifically point them out every time we get a block to it, that there is a note if there is special trimming instructions. Okay, so just always kind of make note of that and just don't assume that it's going to be trimmed like everything else. So you can see up at the top or at the very beginning, there's a note there that shows trimming instructions. So it says for the letter E, we're going to square the finished block to a 4.5-inch square with the trimming guides on the top and the bottom inner corners of the ruler. We don't need to worry about anything on the dot. Going on the dot, we're going to make all the advent pieces later in a few weeks, so we're not going to worry about making that holly yet, but we need to make sure that that inner corners lines up with the inner corners of the 4.5-inch square. Okay, so I am going to back this up a little. I'm going to take this out of the hoop. Now I'm going to use the Kimberbell orange pop rulers. You can use a regular ruler if you would like, but I'm going to use an orange pop. Excuse me. Excuse me. I'm going to clean up my table here for a moment. All right. Now, I would normally use a rotating mat, of which I don't have down here at the moment, so I'm going to get a smaller mat that I can rotate easier. I'm going to take this over to the iron, and I'm going to hit it with the iron real fast so that we can make sure that it's all nice and flat for this project. So I'm just gonna, I don't want to iron it too long because you've got, batting and everything in there, but I just want to make sure that if I have any sort of pucker or pulling or anything, that we get it all nice and flat. Okay, so now we're gonna cut it. So back over to the cutting table. If I was using, well, not if, I am going to be using the orange pop rulers. So I'm going to use the square set. The inner square is 4.5, and I always use this one square out from it to just give me a larger area to kind of hold on to. And I'm lining up the marked lines here, those stitched lines on that 4.5-inch corner. Okay. If you're not using orange pop rulers and you're just going to use a regular square ruler, again, you can take and line up that corner. You can line that corner up with a corner, and you can kind of see the 4.5. Let's move you up here. You can See where the 4.5 is down here, line that up with the 4.5 and the 4.5. Or if you have a 4.5-inch square ruler, you can drop that down and trim it all the way around. But in case you've never seen an orange pop, so with the orange pop rulers, we're cutting on the inside, and the edges are cut or notched so that we can actually cut past the corner and make sure that we get the corner. So I'm always, as a right-hander, we're always cutting with our blade up next to the edge of the ruler. So we're not here because my blade is outside the ruler. So I want to make sure I'm touching the ruler. Okay. I'm going to rotate. There is my 4.5-inch square of letter E. You'll notice that because we trimmed the batting, this is our seam allowance is right there. So we're going to be sewing on that line, and there's no batting in that seam allowance. Okay, so that is your letter E. So let me show you again with with MRRY and all 4 snowflakes. Again, it's just a 4.5-inch square. There is no kind of right or wrong. You want to take the ruler, for the most part, always measure to check, but it should be 4.5 inches from that placement tack down line, from the fabric tack down. Should measure 4.5, okay, and you can cut that way as well, but always double check. Just don't assume, because you know, with embroidery and everything else, you could have some shrinkage, and then the push and the pull of everything can distort and throw things off. And I'm just going to continue to do that. All the way around all of my letters. And my snowflakes. Okay. Okay. Now we have the word Mary. So those are your 4 letters that you're going to do. And once those are all done and trimmed, I'm going to put them back inside of the corresponding baggie that I have marked. You also have 4 snowflakes that you will do. Okay. So Those are your 4 snowflakes. Now I have, because I'm using the kit, everything, I'm just following the in your book, the graphics and the coloration. So for example, on the snowflakes here, you can see that snowflake 1 is the gray with the white snowflake. You have the 2 multicolored snowflake, and then you have a solid aqua. Plus, if you have your bags organized, those should be the fabric that are inside of that. Then the last 2 blocks that you're going to do is This Home Believes. This Home Believes and 'Tis the Season to Snuggle are going to be trimmed up to 4.5 by 6.5. Again, they are still created the same way that you did the square ones that we've just done, except we have used a bigger piece. Okay, so still going to 4.5 by 6.5. I like using my orange pops because I know I'm guaranteed that this is 4.5 by 6.5, whereas if I pull out another ruler, it's very easy to accidentally, trim something too small. So there is your 4.5 by 6.5 Believe block. And then the last one is 'Tis the Season to Snuggle. Again, same thing, 4.5 by 6.5. Rotary cutter needs a new blade too. Must be new blade in the studio day. And there is your 'Tis the Season to Snuggle block. Okay, so this week, snuggle, believe, snowflakes, and the word merry. Those are your goal for this week. Okay, 1 second. I have created you a checklist that you can print if you would like and check mark off as you make these, especially if you're busy and you don't have one full day to dedicate to stitching all of these or anything along that lines, or just for the motivation that you've almost finished for the week. This can be downloaded. I put a link here. It's also in the description of the video, so you can always come back here later and click that link and download and print yourself the checklist for this week. Do I have questions? Okay. Again, is everything that we did with the, let's see here, here I am. Everything that we did this week with the letter E is, the design is created the same, whether it's a snowflake or it's another letter or it's the 2 saying blocks. Find the design quilting file and then layer the actual embroidery design right on top of it. When you open them up on the Berninas, they'll automatically keep them centered. You won't have to do any moving to these designs. We're hooping the same poly mesh. We're doing the same steps for layering the batting, trimming the placement lines, and then filling in the quilt design. and then doing the actual embroidery steps that's there. Everything is the same. I just demonstrated just the E today because it had the extra trimming instructions and the extra little Velcro or hook and loop dot that's out there. So I just wanted to make sure that we saw that, but the rest of them are even easier than the letter E and pretty quick to stitch out. Honestly, I stitched everything out last night, probably in about 2 hours. What's really nice for a couple of tips, if you have more than one oval hoop, okay, or double hoops, I would hoop both of them. So I had 2 oval hoops pulled up. I had them both set up. So when I was doing snowflakes, okay, so 2 of the snowflakes have the same background quilting and the other 2 have the same. So let me show you. Okay. The gray and the solid teal have the snowman for quilting, and the 2 multicolored prints have teacups. So the only difference here is fabric, okay, because I did quilt this in blue. I quilted all of these in white okay. So I loaded 1 hoop, I stitched my placement, I tacked down my batting. While I took that hoop off to trim my batting, I put my other hoop on, I backed my machine up, and I stitched my placement line, and I tacked down the batting. So once that batting was tacked down, I took it off, I replaced the hoop with the trimmed batting, I advanced the machine, I put my fabric down, and I tacked my fabric. Once my fabric was tacked, I quilted it. While that was quilting, I was trimming the batting in my second hooping. Okay. Once the batting was quilted, okay, I changed my thread color to the color coral or blue. Okay. Those are or whatever color you're doing your snowflakes in, but these are the 2 colors that are done just like the one in the book. While that blue one was running, okay, it stitched this one. When that one was done, I backed my machine up and I stitched this one. So I had these 2 were finished and then these 2 were finished. Okay, I backed it up and I changed my thread color and I stitched these 2. So having 2 hoops is while you are working on one hoop, you can be prepping the other hoop. And then when you are finished, you can just put it on and start immediately, and you're not having to take time to rehoop and things along that line. So it's, hoops are not cheap, but the next time that, there is a hoop sale or anything along that lines, it may be time, if you do a lot of embroidery like this, to start investing in duplicate hoops. Okay, I have 2 of every hoop so that I can make multiples and I can be prepping another hoop while the other one is still running for that. Because a lot of times if you do hoop sisters or any of those type of quilt tile scenes, things like that, you can be working on prepping another hoop to pop on the machine as soon as the hooping that you're currently embroidering is done. All right. Well, that is what I have for you this week. That's your homework. Your homework is to work on those stitched blocks. You've got your checklist, so it's the "'Tis the Season to Snuggle," the 4 snowflakes, "This Home Believes," and all of the letters to the word Merry. That's all you need to do this week. Finish prepping if you haven't already finished your prepping. And then we will be back next week on next Wednesday at 10 a.m. For next week's lesson. Next week we will be tackling the introduction or the basics to applique blocks. So we will start off with those types of stitching. And if you have any questions while you are working on this week, you know how to reach me. feel free to drop us an email. You can comment on the video, or you can send us a text, and I will be able to respond to you as soon as I can. All right, happy stitching, and we'll see you all real soon. Thanks for joining us, everybody. Make sure that you like, subscribe, and keep following along for lots of upcoming fun.